Crossbeats production.
What's going on? Here with Nate28, and this is Crossbeats production. So I want to say thank you to you guys quickly, and also say thank you for everything you do for this channel. Thank you for your subscriptions. Thank you for every like you've given and comment, and all the love that you've shown on this channel. So without further ado, let's get into the mixing of this beat, and we'll go straight to that right now. So this particular beat that I'm working on is a beat like I showed you in my previous video about, I think 2 weeks ago roughly now. I was talking about the beat and the gate and how to use a gate to create some sort of rhythm in a track. So if you want to learn how to use a gate for different stuff or ideas on using a gate, go check out my gate video. It's definitely worth looking into. So I want to get to the mixing of this. I'm going to do a couple of parts of this series so that you guys can understand the full depth of the mixing of the track and understand my thought process and, you know, behind of what I do, why I do it, and all that sort of stuff. So let's get into the basics of the mix. So on any mix, I'll just run down a few basics so you understand what's going on and why I do it. So first off, I look at a couple of things. I look at the gain staging of the mix. I look at the type of instruments that are being used, and I also look at the positioning of the stereo field when I receive it. If I'm collecting my own stuff or I'm working on my own track and I've already set up stuff for my own liking, it's not so difficult. You're kind of working on whatever you created in the first place, so it's not too hard to understand where you started, the choices you made throughout that process, and then, you know, start the mixing process. I kind of, when I make a beat, I go through it anyway, but I just thought I'd break it down for you guys to see it from my perspective. So hope you guys enjoy this. Let's get into the first two basics of any mix that I look at when I attack a mix. So I'll just skip gain staging for this moment because I don't want to talk about gain staging. It's just something that I think so many people have already covered a lot on YouTube, but I will discuss it later date on this this series. So without gain staging for, if you guys don't know what it is, if you haven't watched my channel before or you're not sure about gain staging, all it is getting a level mix of all of your instruments together inside of the mix so they sound cohesive without any compression, any panning, any of that. It's just basically getting the levels right. So how it sounds to your ear on a set of speakers, whatever that be, the gain staging to be leveled in a correct way that everything sounds somewhat cohesive together. So that's gain staging in a nutshell. There are more things to it. I just don't want to go into too much in depth right now. So the things I look for first are the instruments that contain low end, mainly speaking the kick and the bass, and possibly other instruments like a piano or synths or other things like that. The reason why I look at the low end first is because usually the low end is just the thing that's felt by the person listening to your track, more than just heard. They feel the rhythm of it, they feel the motion, especially if you have a subwoofer as well, they feel the beat or the kick in your chest, and you feel all of that through the low end. So I think the low end is probably the most crucial thing when looking at a mix, and also getting that as best as possible to the right standard that you're looking at for that track. So the two things I'll just cover here first off are the kick and the bass. If you guys are familiar with the bass that I use in this track, I'm actually going to put a link in the description below so you can download this bass. It'll be in like I guess a Google Drive or something like that. And I'll have instructions on how to install it on the Mac at least, if you have a Windows computer. It's in Serum, by the way, so the bass is a Serum bass, which I semi-created myself. I'll just bring that back up again. So that's the bass there, so you guys can have the preset that I created for that anyway. So the kick and the bass, let me just play those two together and see what they sound like. So a couple of tricks before I go into the mixing. First is the silence before the bass kicks in, just to create a difference in the track. It just helps to break up some of the monotony of, you know, hearing the bass continually go throughout the entire track. Just something to point out there. So let's get into the mixing of it. So I showed you the gate on a previous video, but I'll just show it again. So the gate is basically allowing some of the roll off of the bass, specifically on the top, and a little bit Well, not so much on the bottom because I've rolled it at to 300 hertz, but some of the top end frequencies, and allows it to cut off kind of where, where the tail end of the bass is. So where it goes quiet, the gate cuts that out, and then it allows more breathing space for other things in the mix. Settings that I've used here are mainly the attack and release settings to ear. So when I listen to it, I hear the attack and release, and I just play with it that way. If you want to get into a good habit with attack and release, even on a compressor, there is a site that it's called nickfever.com, I think it is. But if you go into Google and just type in delay calculator or reverb delay calculator, you'll find that if you type in a BPM to one of those, it'll come back with the list of, for example, 1/8, 1/4, or 1/16, or 132, or whatever you want it to be. The list of the attack and release times, or more or less the time constant of those settings for a BPM of 156, for example. So that's a good way to set release on a compressor, or attack on a compressor, or even on a gate, or anything that's time constant that uses that kind of thing. So the gate's doing that. Let me play this to you without the gate on the kick and the bass and show you what it sounds like. So let's go. So you can kind of hear, just by using the gate on both of those instruments, they became more glued together and sounded like they were in the one thing they were supposed to be together. Without it, they just sounded like a kick and a bass, kind of in the track. But anyway, that's what I decided to throw on a gate, and it worked out really well. So that's what the gate's doing on the bass. Next thing is the compressor, which is allowing the kick to sidechain the bass out of the way. Sidechain compression, basically, in essence. So sidechain compression is very useful if you want to use a bass that's got a really kind of close attack to the kick, or if it's interfering with the bass instrument at all with the kick. Use sidechain to push that bass out of the way, or you can use sidechain on other things, piano or whatever you want to put it on, really. Anything that's got low end, or just to create rhythm in the track, you can use it for that as well. So I've got the attack and release settings. The fastest attack it can be, semi-fast release, so 36 milliseconds, or 30, I think 37 if you want to round it up. And that's the release to be quite quick with the bass. Now, if you just watch this here, it's reducing roughly 4 dB of compression, or pushing sidechain compression out of the way. And I've got the threshold set here, which is just to my track. It won't be specific to any track you work on, but whatever you work on, just set the threshold adequate to what you want it to remove. 2-to-1 ratio, and the knee is quite quick, so the knee goes on a really sharp angle, so it removes it quite quickly for me. So that's what that's doing. The next thing is the Alloy 2, which creates a bit of distortion on the kick, on the bass, I should say. And the reason why I do that is to add a bit of harmonics, so it brings the bass further up into the more lower mid-range frequency, and it's not just in the low frequency area. You want to do that so it can be heard on little speakers and little monitors. I've got an Aventone speaker, which is just a mono speaker in my studio that I use to listen to, which is kind of like a TV speaker, very small speaker, doesn't have a lot of low end. So I can listen to things to represent that. If you didn't have that, or you wanted to use something sounding similar to that, my recommendation is, if you have like a MacBook, like if you're using a MacBook or whatnot, if you're not using a MacBook, I don't know what the speakers are like on the Windows computers, what they sound like, but generally any small speaker is a good thing to listen through. So just disconnect your studio monitors if you can, through your setup, and then just listen through your computer speakers and see if you can hear the low end frequency on the bass instrument still. If you can, the lower, I mean low mids, not low, but if you can hear the low mids, or if you can hear the bass at all, that's a good sign that you can hear it on other settings, like for a shop or wherever you're listening to that doesn't have full representation of the low end. So that's a little trick I would use if I didn't have the Aventone speaker to work with. So that's what Alloy 2 is doing, which a plugin that you can see there. Next thing is the mix tool, which I'm blocking some DC offset. I don't want to explain too much about that right now, but it basically just allows extra headroom if there's any issue with DC. And I'm reducing some volume there by 6 dB. I'll just quickly explain it to you actually. So if you can see here on the waveform, just find a waveform here. So we've got a waveform which I'll just make a little bit larger so you can see what's going on. These waveforms, basically that 0 dB line that's in the center there is what you have issues with if there's a DC offset or correction issue. So it's basically a movement of the line of 0 dB, which creates extra issues with headroom or even phase and stuff like that. So that's what that is preventing, if there is any. Just usually I can hear issues when I hear it, so I put it on there. Next thing is the Ozone 7 on the bass instrument, which I'll show you that now. I'll just play that and show you what it sounds like. So you can hear bass goes wider. What's happening there is I'm reducing some of the volume, sorry, not the volume, the frequency into the mids. So anything below 80, I'm going completely mono, and anything above 80, it's just reducing some of that by a slight amount. Excuse me. So if you have issues with low end frequency, specifically on a subwoofer, that's where you're going to hear representation of these kind of frequencies, especially below 80. This is a plugin that you can use. There are other ones out there that you can use to reduce the mids and the low end frequencies to get that to sit right with the rest of the instruments in your track. If you notice, I'll just show you on this spectrometer here. I'll bring this up because this is a handy tool to see what's going on. So let's play the bass on its own, and then I'll introduce the kick, then I'll remove the bass. So let's go with the bass. So as you can see there, with the bass, it goes a little bit wider than what the kick's doing, at least, because the kick's pretty much all down the center, all on the mono channel, but the bass is kind of spreading out a little bit. If you can see this here, the correlation meter, which I'll show you again on the bass, it stays right at the top pretty much the whole entire time, so I'm quite in phase, there's no issue with that. But it allows some of the breathing of the bass to be on the width of the track, so out on the left and right channel. It just allows the track to have life and for the bass to breathe inside of the track, and it makes it sound a little bit better as well, rather than just being completely mono. So that's a little thing that I just wanted to point out with the bass and the kick. The kick as well, I'll just show you quickly what I did with the kick to get it the way it sounds. I removed some DC offset again, so I put that on there, just turn it on and off. If you don't need it, chuck it away, whatever. Remove some of the volume of that. This plugin here, which is the Lindell plugin, it's on my kick. I'm just using it to remove some of the top end frequency, and I'm also using it to get some gain and then reduction. So it kind of uses this preamp emulation as like a preamp, add some additional character to the kick that it didn't have before. And the high pass filter, I'm not using at all. I'm just leaving that, and I'm boosting. Where was it? No, I'm not boosting anything with the EQ, so I left it alone. I did play with the EQ a bit, but then I realized I didn't need it. The kick sounded good how it was. So then the gate, I showed you that before. That's the settings again, just so if you don't know already. Then the next thing was the Ozone 7, reducing some of the low end frequency again below 76 hertz. And that's reducing it by 80, so it's not entirely mono, but it's allowing it to be mostly mono in the mono channel there. So that's part one for this mixing video, and I just wanted to show you the basic concept of what I first aim at when I look at a mix. The basics are the bass and the kick. If you can get those two right, sounding good together, obviously everything needs to be level matched and stuff like that, so you're looking at getting gain staging done with your first initial gain staging setup right. But then when you get that done, you look at the things that are hogging the low end frequencies. Well, that's what I do, at least anyway. And you try and work around those first. And if you can get those to sit right in the mix, then you can start working on everything else in the level playing field. So hopefully you guys liked this video. If you did, remember to hit that like button. Make your comments below if you have anything else you want to see on the channel, or any other comments you want to make. And remember, on the download of this, sorry, on the comments, you'll see the download for this link on the base there. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. It's a free complimentary thing. Hopefully can help you guys produce some good tracks there. And otherwise, I'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.